Honorable guests, and of course the Dean of the Gordon Institute of Business and Science, business people, students, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be invited to the Gordon Institute of Business Science to share my views and vision about a South Africa that I hope we all would like to build. At the core, South Africans want a country that is democratic, prosperous, peaceful, non-racial, non-sexist, a more equal society which is inclusive, growing strongly economically, and that creates opportunities for all. It is indeed my hope that this is the South Africa that we all collectively aspire to and will work together to build. A lot has been achieved in the democratization of South Africa, improving the basic needs of our people, as well as gender inequalities. However, there are still many challenges we need to address. The recent statistics on poverty published by Stats SAA revealed that more than half of South Africans still live below the poverty datum line. Inequalities remain high with a Gini coefficient of 0.69. Youth unemployment rates remain intolerably high. And of course, more than half of the unemployed are under 35. Our society still remains patriarchal, with a gender wage gap still between 15 and 17%, and of course an alarming rate of gender-based violence and generally high crime rates, particularly violent crimes. The majority of our people remain landless, and the economy is stagnant, deindustrializing, and dominated by monopolies which are predominantly white and male, both historically and today. A small portion of the population live in opulence, and a large number of people still live under conditions of squalor in some cases. And there's also unacceptable levels of corruption, both in the public and private sector. But as stated by the Reconstruction and Development Program, RDP, and reiterated by the National Development Plan, NDP, in 2012, I just want to quote a bit from there, no political democracy can survive and flourish if the mass of our people remain in poverty, without land, without tangible prospects for a better life. Attacking poverty without land, without tangible prospects for a better life. So it means that the first priority of a democratic government has to be to deal with poverty, to deal with deprivation, and to deal with landlessness, as the NDP says, close quote. All South Africans, therefore, have a responsibility to find solutions to these fundamental problems of poverty, inequality, unemployment. This is not a responsibility of government alone. It's a responsibility that we all have to share. It should therefore come as no surprise to anyone to hear many South Africans talking about and being mobilized behind radical economic transformation. Of course, when we talk about radical economic transformation, we are saying that there needs to be a fundamental and radical change in the structure, system, institutions, patterns of ownership, management and control of the South African economy in favor of all of us, favor of the majority, especially, of course, the poor, the majority of whom are African and female. Ladies and gentlemen, the African Union Agenda 2063, which we championed whilst I was the chair of the African Union Commission, provides a framework which dovetails very clearly with the South African core aspirations. After all, South Africa is part of the African continent, but of course South Africa has a head start in its level of development compared to the African economies, other African economies. This also means that we must also learn from other African countries who are making greater progress despite starting from a low base. But South Africa also has a role to play in contributing to the continent's overall progress. Ladies and gentlemen, the South African economic growth trajectory was interrupted, as we all know, in 2008 with the financial crisis, and since then it has not been able to sustainably recover. South Africa's ability to create new jobs, eradicate poverty, and thus deal a lasting blow to inequalities has remained very constrained. The skills deficit, which exacerbates job creation challenges, remains a perennial issue that needs to be tackled. But also, a paradox exists, in my view, between government and the private sector, where the government is running a deficit and a rising debt, whilst the corporate sector remains flush with excess cash balances, and yet is very reluctant or hesitant to invest in the domestic economy. Foreign direct investment has been stagnant, whilst investments abroad by South Africans and corporates of South African origin has been on the rise. South African companies have invested successfully in the rest of Africa and even contributed to changing the economic landscape in some of the African countries, which is very commendable. And South African-born entrepreneurs and business people continue to shine bright globally, and some are at the cutting edge of innovative industries. And yet, we have here at home seen a process of deindustrialization, a sense of business as usual, of making changes only at the margins, and also of being overtaken and left behind in important African and global economic developments, whilst the South African economy remains virtually unchanged. In Africa, people used to exclude South Africa in the statistics of Africa because they were saying the size of our economy is too big, so it distorts the average in Africa. But today, well, they also want to exclude us, but for a different reason. They are saying we are distorting the growth rate because we are not growing, so we're dragging everybody down. So I think we shouldn't be proud of that. We should be trying to find ways to grow. A number of well-performing African countries are growing at double digits, whilst there is a general focus as part of the Africa Agenda 2063 that targets and wants to ensure that the aggregate continental growth reaches 7% and above. in order to reach the tipping point with regards to the underdevelopment and modernization of our continent. So I think today we need, as South Africans, to discuss what do we need to do as South Africans. I don't have all the answers, but I'm sure collectively we will have the answers. So firstly, I think as South Africans we just need to be able to dream again about enabling our citizens to realize the fruit of a democratic, prosperous, and secure South Africa. All citizens must live in an environment and in a society that is conducive for them to reach their full potential. This requires strategies for radical economic transformation that recognizes that we cannot simply have business as usual, and that we need to break away from the structural limits and subjective challenges that we face. Amongst what is required are a skills revolution, job creation, enhanced service delivery, smart infrastructure investment, smart urbanization, rural modernization and development, driving up both domestic and foreign investments, enhancing the efficiency and the effectiveness of state enterprises, entrepreneurship-orientated Black economic empowerment program, better access to finance, and harnessing the potential of the blue economy in the context of growth orientation and prudent macroeconomic management. The private sector and business schools often remind us that the private sector is the main creator of jobs. And this needs to be explored and understand why are we not creating jobs and what should be done by government, by business, so that we can create the most needed jobs in our country. But we must also build and harness a pioneering entrepreneurship spirit of South African business people and youth. This requires trust between government and the private sector. We need to create a sector-focused business advisory groupings, such as the financial sector, the manufacturing sector, retail sector, and so on, agro-processing, and other appropriate groupings. And I think these advisory groups, some of them already exist, but we need to create more, which will have both the captains of industry and other stakeholders, workers, professionals, academics, and government to meet regularly to engage on how government and business can work together to contribute to the transformation of these sectors, and how we can work together to again harness the pioneering entrepreneurship, the spirit of innovation of all South Africans, so that we can unleash our collective energies and creativity in order to grow the economy in South Africa. Most importantly, we also need to strategize on what needs to be done to unlock domestic investments. We can not only focus on foreign investments, important as they are, but we also need to pay attention to direct domestic investments. And I think this is possible because we know that there is money in South Africa that South African corporates possess. But I think one of the impediments for job creation and competitiveness is also the monopolies. And I think we need to open up for new entrants into the economy, especially black and female-owned businesses. Government has a role in strengthening competition institutions and regulations, but also through opening up the economy through its procurement strategies. I think the government can use its procurement strategies in order to assist up-and-coming businesses, businesses of young people, women, black people, so that they can grow but also have access to our markets and be more viable. Also, government, in my view, must strengthen the capacity of government and have skills in government systems and processes that will allow it to deliver the core services that sometimes are outsourced without leading to savings or quality or efficiency. And I think if government has those capacities, it can also be able to be efficient, effective, transparent in delivering services to our people and deliver them at a cost-effective price. Ladies and gentlemen, I also think South Africa needs a new national, but also maybe Southern African industrial revolution, because we have not been industrializing. Other regions are industrializing, even on the continent. But South Africa, we have seen de-industrialization, and I think we need to change that. And I think it's possible because we have a market not only in Southern Africa, but in Africa. And that market is already more than 1 billion strong. By 2050, it will be more than 2 billion strong. Other people see Africa as a huge market, but we don't see ourselves as a market for ourselves. But of course, to utilize that market, it means we must be industrializing. And we must be preparing and shaping up for the fourth industrial revolution as well, including the development of modern infrastructure, the blue economy and the green economy. But we need to be very focused and systematic. We need to do a sector-by-sector analysis of what national and regional opportunities exist and develop and implement strategies for each of these sectors that will contribute towards the elusive 7% growth target, create jobs, and broaden economic participation. Mineral beneficiation is one of the areas where we can create jobs, get better revenue for our minerals, because as we know, raw materials fetch a fraction of what finished goods fetch. But also the volatility of raw materials is much bigger than the volatility of finished goods. So I think we need to increasingly beneficiate and add value. We also need to look at the ocean as a huge economic space and look at it, its whole value chain, because the blue economy has transport in it, it has logistics, it has insurance, it has tourism, it has mining, not only oil and gas, but also minerals. It has fishing. So it's a huge economic space that we have not explored to its full potential. We also need to look at the cultural and creative sectors. These can create jobs very easily. And for instance, we know Nigeria has taken advantage of that. Now it is the second biggest film producing country. And there is no need why we can't also take advantage of that. And the green economies are important as well. That whole area of renewable energies and other areas are important. We also need urgently, as the NDP says, that the people do not have land, to get into land and agrarian reform. Because land is a key resource. It's an inexhaustible resource if managed properly. And so we can't avoid it. And the land must be redistributed for a number of reasons: for agriculture, for residential, and for commercial purposes. We must strive to build a vibrant and diverse agricultural sector for all, including the development of agriculture in the rural areas through investments by the state in irrigation, extension services, access to inputs like seeds, safe fertilizers, and capital. We also need to look at innovative solutions, even in the urban areas, like vertical agriculture, which can easily be done in any urban setting. This also includes transformation of the agro-processing and retail sectors, so that it is mixed, large, medium, and small companies, and provide new entrants into this sector and explore new markets and joint ventures on the African continent. We should also aim to play a significant role in reducing the over $70 billion we spend as a continent buying processed food. So, ladies and gentlemen, I also need that all of the above things will require a well-educated, well-skilled population that can respond to the demands of today and demands of tomorrow, and the global realities of a fast-changing developments in production, in technology, and knowledge production. This is why we talk about a skills revolution in South Africa and in Africa. The job creation agenda should recognize the need to develop more job-ready individuals with appropriate skills to enter the job market. This can be done by looking and studying some of the successful industrial countries like Germany, like Switzerland, like Japan, and many others. What makes them so successful, and what type of education do they have? For instance, just using an example, this can be done with a bifurcated education system similar to Switzerland and Germany, which has both the academic channel to university degrees and a vocational channel, where the degree course involves work, internship, and study, the result of which is a degree qualification with a strong practical streak. The second stream, with vocational education and work and internship, not only creates a pool of affordable workforce for business, but also the employees more job ready when they attain their qualification. It is not surprising that most learners in a place like Switzerland prefer the vocational route with an internship with income earnings. South Africa should look at developing a model as a partnership between government, private sector, and educational institutions, so that all of us are focused into creating people who are job ready or people who can create jobs. And if we don't bring all these three elements, we'll end up with people who have degrees but who can't get employment because their education is not based on the needs of the present day economy. So the debate needs to shift from one of the outcomes-based education or not to a debate of job readiness education model or not. And upstream, there is a need to invest in teacher training colleges and teacher development, making sure that the teachers receive the best skills in delivering knowledge material to learners on both academic and vocational education, and in the process fundamentally changing the quality and outcomes of our basic education. Far more basic is the development of artisanal skills. Right through primary school and secondary school, simply artisanal skills should be taught alongside the academic curriculum. The skills can include anything from sewing, woodwork, metalwork, arts, culture, technical drawing skills, agriculture, and many others. For example, a grade 12 learner could receive a certificate of grade 12, but also a certificate on one of the artisanal skills. And then they can decide whether they want to continue with the artisanal side and the vocational side or with the academic side. Because I think in our situation where employment is such a critical issue, to train young people for 12 years without them having any basic skills, but also knowing that not all of them will go to university, maybe it's something that we need to rethink. And of course, the question would be, what about those who are already out? Because we can't only look at those who are still in the system or still going to join, but we need to also look at how do we give these artisanal skills to the young people who are out of school, so that indeed they can have the possibility of either creating employment themselves or being employed. So again, the same will go for them, training them in artisanal skills, furniture making, metalwork, welding, mechanics, car mechanics, repair, bricklaying, software development, crafts, cultural activities, film industry, animation design, recording studios for music, and many other skills. But we must pay attention to those and have these programs either at existing TVET colleges or additional specialized institutions and programs. And also, we should give them the skills, business skills in the process, and even cooperative skills, because some of them can come together to form cooperatives to improve access to markets and access to finance. even in the rural areas, these artisanal skills would be working. They can form cooperatives, including crafts, and both for local and for export markets. And of course, some of the skills that would be learned can also be used in manufacturing small agricultural equipment like the metalwork skills, as we have seen in the case of many other developing countries in other continents. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to just say something about state enterprises, which should also contribute tangibly to skills development and entrepreneurship. All state enterprises should run entrepreneurship programs, targeted procurement programs for SMEs, and also involvement in vocational skills development along with TVETs. Trainees should be able to acquire basic engineering skills through apprenticeship programs run by state enterprises and TVETs. State enterprises should be a source of electricians, plumbers, mechanics, fitter, antennas, boiler makers, just to name a few. And they should produce these for the whole of South Africa. And having said this about training, I also want to emphasize that there should be no child in South Africa that is denied education because it's poor. So that should be the South Africa we aspire to. Let me also just say something about the black economic empowerment. I think black economic empowerment was introduced in South Africa in order to deal with the economic imbalances created by our history of an apartheid system that denied black people and Africans any entry into mainstream economy. And whilst the first phase of BEE focused on share transfer, I think there is a need to firmly shift into entrepreneurship-driven black economic empowerment model, focusing on creating new businesses rather than mere share purchasing in existing businesses. Because this does not grow the economy. You just enter into a business that is already there. There are no new businesses that are created to grow the economic cake. So funding entrepreneurs for startup and growth must be key to the EE model, building entrepreneurship ecosystems to support these startups will go a long way in ensuring their future success. And we must create an environment where it's easy to start a business and to grow a business. And what is not talked about a lot, again, is the blue economy, but I've already mentioned that. But I think it's a great place to also grow our economy and unlock the potential of that economy through as a source of fish. There are only few companies that are actually global fishing companies in this country, and I think there's space for more. There's hydrocarbons in the sea, there's tourism, coastal, floating and deep sea tourism, there's transport. So manufacturing in relation to the blue economy also represents many opportunities for job creation. We also know that oil, countries like Saudi, Iran, India, Western Australia, Angola, are sourcing hydrocarbons offshore. and 40% of the world's offshore oil production comes from the Indian Ocean, which we also share. Clearly, South Africa should target the blue economy in order to unlock this potential for future growth. And of course, it could also be extended to shipbuilding, and incentives could be given to that industry, and also employ more they should employ more South Africans and increase procurement from South Africa for the consumables that are used in that industry. But at the same time, we have to develop very good waste management systems so that we do not dump our waste in the seas, because I attended the World Summit on the blue economy in Portugal 2 years ago, and there were shocking statistics about how much the world is dumping into the sea. Just plastics alone. We're dumping 80 million tons of plastics every year, and they were saying if we continue at that rate, by 2050 there'll be more plastic than fish in the sea. So I think that's why some of the countries have started banning plastics and not using plastics. But generally, we need to also look after that environment. And ladies and gentlemen, we also need to look at infrastructure investments. And we need to look at normal infrastructure, roads, rail, ports, but also begin to look at smart infrastructure. Because other countries are beginning to use smart infrastructure. For instance, there are countries where areas that are known to be very heavy traffic and they can no longer build any more roads. They are using cable transport to transport people, which is cheaper than even roads in terms of the impact to cost ratio. So we should not just think about present or things that we have known yesterday. We must be forward-looking and look at really smart infrastructure, smart agriculture, and many other areas. And I think we should also explore how to do infrastructure projects that can be implemented through public and private ownership partnerships in order to crowd in the private sector, which tends to have more resources, obviously, than government. And these infrastructure projects will also create jobs, deepen supply chains, and be a potent source of innovation. And innovation is very important in any modern economy. And so we must also look at creating maybe a continental innovation hub in South Africa in the next 10, 20 years. We know these innovation hubs. We've seen them in the US. We have seen them in Russia, because these innovation hubs can push the boundaries of science and technology. And we can partner with South Africans, companies, global companies, and in order to commercialize the technology that would come out of those innovation hubs. And innovation hubs will also provide incubation activities and have the custody of intellectual property and create ecosystems of companies interested in innovation and partners. The hub could also offer scholarships for researchers and students across the continent. Here again, I see a role of top business schools, but also of business partners and government. Ladies and gentlemen, Let's just look at the macroeconomic front, which is an abiding imperative to ensure that our macroeconomic management contributes towards growth and development and meeting our overall national targets in a sustainable manner. We must therefore ensure a proper balance of managing the twin deficits of the public budget deficit and the current account deficit, which, if successful, helps contain inflation, reduce exchange rate volatility, and keep interest rates within affordable levels for borrowers. We must also look at catalytic macroeconomic management, which would mean setting performance targets for government and for Treasury in terms of objectives of an inclusive growth, such as poverty reduction and job creation. The budget allocations could be targeting development gaps, and we should be able to track through the budget what impact that budget is making on the reduction of poverty. We should be able to track how many jobs have been created through that budget and whether the inequality gap is being narrowed. And so also have a budget allocation that will also improve gender equity. So both prudent macroeconomic management and catalytic macroeconomic management can coexist. They are not mutually exclusive. We have stressed the importance of ensuring that we move away from business as usual. So the approach is to effectively transform the economy. This must also apply to the state, because we can't be talking about radically transforming the economy, but leaving the state to be business as usual. So we must also make sure that civil servants and government leaders are responsive to the needs of the people, and the audit should be both quantitative and qualitative, based on the targets around gender equity, poverty reduction, job creation, and so on. So, ladies and gentlemen, in all the above, the emancipation of women is also central, because women are half the population. And of course, if you leave half the talent, we cannot reach our full potential. We cannot have prosperity. And I said earlier that poverty is the face of a woman, and therefore, if we're dealing with poverty, we have to deal with the emancipation of women. And women can play a positive role in the transformation of our economy. And therefore, the skills, entrepreneurship, agro-processing, blue economy, mineral beneficiation must also involve women. And I would also like to say that for the above work, we need some critical success factors. A commitment to work together towards a national vision and a developmental state that can drive, implement, and harness the energy of all South Africans. This is why we must address the issue of the capacity and efficiency and professionalism of the state, and why we must decisively tackle issues of corruption, social distance, and unresponsive governance at all levels. Lastly, the financial sector, in a way, is the commanding height of the economy, and it is why the national policy of the ANC has been discussing issues that must eventually be decided at the national conference, whether it's the ownership of the Reserve Bank, and also financial institutions, creation of more banks, so that we have financial institutions that can also participate effectively in the transformation of the economy, in the building of new entrants into the industries, into funding of young women, black entrepreneurs. But we also need to train our young people in the financial sector. We need more chartered accountants, more actuaries, and other skills. In conclusion, South Africa must ensure that every man and woman can contribute to the economy and benefit from it equitably. South Africa should make use of all its available resources to do this. Government should stand ready and collaborate on this journey without shirking on its responsibilities and policy rules to enable business and all citizens to realize their aspirations. Business should play its role. Educational institutions must play their role. As citizens, we must play our role and take our responsibilities. And no one should be left behind. We must have a tide that lifts all boats. I thank you.